Halloween, as we all know, is a special time on The Simpsons. A time for our favorite characters to live out both their craziest fantasies and nightmares. A time to do silly and broad parodies, a time for eating sweets, a time to visit our dear friends Kang and Kodos. It's also a good time to kill off our favorite characters, again and again and again, and again and again. By now we've seen them killed in just about every way possible. Stabbed, shot, eaten alive, squashed, you name it. Now, it didn't always be this way. The first couple specials barely had any deaths at all. It was a simpler, more quaint time. But that makes me wonder. We've seen some characters killed off year after year. It's almost an annual tradition for some of them. Surely, though, there has to be one favorite victim of our sadistic writing team over the years. One character they love to pick on. Who in Springfield has been killed off the most? Alright, it's time to kill off our favorite Simpsons characters. Hooray! Yes, I know how bloody-minded this exercise is, but it's Halloween season, dang it! Let's do something ghoulish. But first, we have to define our rules on what constitutes a death. This is going to be somewhat subjective, but here is the criteria I am using. We're mainly looking for three different things. First, character deaths that we explicitly see happen. Second, off-screen deaths that are mentioned. And third, deaths that are in the process of happening or are pretty much a done deal. We essentially want confirmation that a character has been killed. We want to avoid assumptions and guesswork. For example, these three characters being burned at the stake would count as deaths, even though they cut away. But something like Martin being called to the principal's office doesn't count, because we never actually see what happens. There's no confirmation, we don't see Martin as a zombie later. For all we know, he could have given 40 whacks to Zombie Skinner's head. Actually, yeah, I kinda like that theory. This is canon now. The point is, we don't want to play guessing games. When they drop the bomb on the town, we don't want to make guesses regarding who was actually in Springfield, who got killed, and who became a mutant. What we want to see are the charred corpses. Furthermore, all zombie characters count as being dead, since they're the living dead after all. This includes munchers. But vampires, werewolves, and others do not count, since they are undead and could be killed later. All stories entirely contained in dreams or fantasies will be factored in. Any character still counts as being killed, even when there is a story reason for them being resurrected later. And finally, we're just sticking to main story segments for now in Treehouse of Horror episodes. No openings or couch gags. Don't worry, I'll give you those stats too, but you'll see that they tip the scales in one particular direction. So here is a collection of the Simpsons characters killed most often in this series. Place your bets now on who will be number 1. Before I give you our top 3, let's go over the honorable mentions. In 8th place, with 7 deaths apiece, we have Krusty the Clown and Moe. Both of these characters have been killed in shockingly varied ways. Krusty does zombie duty twice, the rest are all unique. Moe, on the other hand, gets killed by the Simpson family most of the time. You would think Moe would have a suicide in here, since that's kind of his thing, but the Halloween season has avoided it so far. They saved that for Christmas. In 7th place, it's Groundskeeper Willie, with 8 deaths total. Willie was easily the writer's favorite victim in the early years, being killed 3 times in Treehouse of Horror 5, then again the following year. Was expecting him to be a lot higher in the ranking actually, but the writers gave him a break in the later years. He definitely gets the most graphic deaths, however. Chief Wiggum clocks in at 6th place, being killed 9 times. He's the opposite of Willie in that he didn't get killed off until season 10, and then got it 5 years in a row, from Treehouse of Horror 15 all the way through 19. He's definitely a favorite of the middle to later seasons. In 4th place, we have another tie, with 10 deaths apiece. This time it's Principal Skinner and Mr. Burns. Somewhat surprisingly, Skinner has only been killed by Bart twice, with the rest at the hands of various monsters. Even Agnes gets one. As authority figures or antagonists, both he and Mr. Burns are popular murder victims, so they tend to be easy targets in these Halloween specials. Almost the whole Simpson family has had a go at killing Mr. Burns by now. This is kind of appropriate, that's what this YouTube series is about after all. Homer even gets Flanders to do one for him. Speaking of which, Ned Flanders ends up as our bronze medalist, being killed a staggering 12 times so far. The writers seem to love killing this guy. He's so kind-hearted that bad things just tend to happen to him. Also, he's an enemy of Homer, which is usually a bad place to be in during these segments. Flanders has been shot by Homer, decapitated by a gremlin, shot again by the family this time, and decapitated once again. Then he gets his organs harvested, dies in a meltdown, gets his head shrunk, decapitated by the Blob, becomes a muncher, eaten at a vampire dinner, decapitated by the town, and then choked to death by Pazuzu Maggie. It's quite a coincidence how much Ned has lost his head over the years. There must be something about Flanders' face that makes the writers want to decapitate this poor guy so much. Maybe it's his mustache. Our top two were extremely close, with only one death separating them in the totals. In second place, I think we have a minor upset too. Second place belongs to Homer Simpson, with 14 deaths total. In the early years, Homer gets killed regularly during the opening credits, but they didn't actually kill him in a story until Treehouse of Horror 9, when the Flanders werewolf rips him apart. And even that one is off-screen. After that, the floodgates open, and it's a veritable golden age of Homer death. His head explodes in space, he chokes on broccoli, he falls into Springfield Gorge, his future self is shot by Moe, he gets shot by Flanders, and he gets shot by Ghost Krusty. He becomes a muncher, he dies after turning into a bat, gets strangled by God, stabbed by Maggie, stabbed by Bart, and inexplicably cannibalizes himself. And that is not even his craziest death. Somehow Homer manages to get killed by Homer, the Frosty Chocolate Milkshake's incarnation. That is quite impressive. Homer actually holds the record for most deaths in the most individual stories. He would probably be in first place overall. It is just an unusual situation with the final character on this list. If you know your modern Simpsons, you probably already knew who is going to be number one. In first place, the most killed off character in Treehouse of Horror history is Bart Simpson, with 15 deaths in 8 different segments. We see him fall into a meat grinder, his head explodes in space, he dies of a stretchy neck, he's killed by Homer's meltdown. Lisa accidentally kills him with a knife, he chokes on an acorn, and he gets hanged with Milhouse. The deciding factor on this countdown is ultimately Treehouse of Horror 26, when Sideshow Bob comes to town. They did an entire segment about Bob killing Bart and bringing him back to life with a machine, repeating this process over and over and over again. We see Bart killed in 8 different ways. He gets spear gunned, sledgehammered, his head shot off, attacked by lions, flattened, suffered a heart attack, turned into Kool-Aid, and chopped up into little pieces. That's a pretty gruesome series of deaths. To be honest, I've always found this segment more creepy ew than creepy scary, with his body being kept in Sideshow Bob's basement and all, but your mileage may vary. Here's the top 10 characters without including opening segments and couch gags. Here's how it changes when you include everything. Obviously, the Simpson family are in a lot of openers, so their numbers get boosted a lot. Most of Marge, Lisa, and Maggie's deaths happen as couch gags. Homer actually leapfrogs Bart when you factor these in, getting killed an additional 11 times. It's also the only time Marge kills him in any of these specials. You notice, the majority of these characters listed are adults. Bart Simpson is the huge outlier, the only minor the writers are comfortable killing off on a regular basis. In general, the show definitely tends to shield its children characters more than the adults. This makes sense, most media tends to do this. It's obviously not an unbreakable rule, you just happen to see adults killed more often in horror films and stuff. The Simpsons as a series certainly has no qualms about killing its children characters. The Nightmare Cafeteria and Elm Street segments were all about that dynamic. Still, the large majority were either implied or off-screen. Martin is our main exception. After this era, they mostly left the kids alone until around season 20 or so. That's when they get more explicit. The only minors who get killed off regularly are Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearney, which makes sense in the horror genre since they're teenagers and all. Also, Ooter gets eaten in 2 separate stories. Nice. The show has never killed off Santa's Little Helper, but Snowball has gotten killed twice. That's hardly surprising though, given Snowball's history in the series. What is surprising is that they've only killed Hans Moleman 5 times in nearly 30 years of these specials. What is it, opposite day? For the most part, the writers avoid killing off the Simpsons ladies. All of Lisa and Maggie's deaths are with other family members. Neither character has ever had a solo death. In addition, Marge has never actually had a quote-unquote violent death in the series. She gets 2 off-screen, as the Lost Lenore and during Homer and Flanders' meltdown. Her only other 2 deaths are suicides, one from eating poison cake, and one from sticking her head in the oven. It's somewhat shocking how much more the Simpson men get killed off in Treehouse of Horror segments. Part of it is just the fact that Homer and Bart tend to gobble up all the screen time on this show. I would also guess that Marge and Lisa's temperament and characterization play a significant role. They're less likely to get into trouble or randomly do stupid things. We'll occasionally see Lisa do something dangerous, like in the most recent episode, but the writers will usually spare her. Did anyone really expect Lisa to get eaten right here? I'm not one of those internet people who hates Lisa's guts and want her dead. It's just a noticeable trend by now. The show has decided that Lisa getting killed wouldn't be entertaining in a horror context. They did recently show off her more murderous side of her personality, however. By the way, Homer easily holds the record for killing the most Simpsons regulars, killing 35 different people on 44 different occasions. I mean, Homer literally becomes the Grim Reaper in one story. Death is obviously going to follow. In others, he becomes King Homer, or the Blob, or Homerzilla, or a violent assassin, or the murderer's fat in the hat. Let's just say the writers love a good Homer murder segment. I'd like to say none of this is in character for Homer, but let's not be naive. However, Mr. Burns holds the record for the most confirmed murders in one individual segment. In Treehouse of Horror 16, they do a parody of The Most Dangerous Game, which is essentially an excuse to watch him shoot 17 of our favorite characters. This segment alone has 20 deaths total. Treehouse of Horror 27 is easily the most bloody Halloween special they've ever done, with a whopping 53 different regulars killed between the 3 stories. There's something up with this special. I'm thinking this was by deliberate design. The writers spread around the deaths so suspiciously evenly, like they're going off of a checklist. Nelson is literally the only character who gets killed twice. The first 2 stories are all about the kids, with the Hunger Games parody and Lisa's killer imaginary friend. There's no overlap with the kid characters. In the 3rd segment, the James Bond or Kingsman parody kills off a bunch of the adult characters. It ends in a bloody brawl that kills upwards of 40 people. Jeez, guys. The later seasons tend to be more aggressive in killing off characters, but it's not super extreme across the board. Even old ones like Treehouse of Horror 3 and 5 had a dozen deaths apiece. The later episodes are just a little more streaky. When they feature a monster on a rampage, they really go on a rampage. They also sometimes do stories that aren't really horror or Halloween themed, but are just an excuse for more violence. Somehow they still haven't done a Friday the 13th parody after all these years, though. Maybe they got enough of that in Season 5. So after all that murder, death, gore, and statistics, what have we learned today? Well, we've definitely learned how the Simpsons writers get out their aggression every year. And we've definitely learned that Homer and Bart are their favorite punching bags. Looking back at all these Treehouse of Horror episodes, I really appreciate that the show can imagine these insanely horrific situations, but still have written them within the framework of the show. They've done a good job keeping stuff within established logic, established relationships. It's not like they resort to the Simpson family suddenly killing each other every year because that's shocking. It's actually kind of nice that the Simpson family has remained a loving family the majority of the time, that killings are pretty rare. And when it does happen, the kids are killing Homer. That's the direction you probably want to go. Let's instead focus our time on the real rivalries of the show. They're a lot more fun to play around with. I mean, what's the point of having a character like Mr. Burns in the series if you can't murder him in your Harry Potter parody? Okay, maybe this is a weird Halloween example. Before I end this video, I want to credit the Simpsons Wiki for providing a good guideline on where to find all this morbid stuff. Also, big thanks to Mr. Brad Lascelle, the most encyclopedic Simpsons fan I know, who consulted on all these close calls and ambiguous deaths. Determining what constitutes a death in a cartoon is a surprisingly complicated and nuanced discussion. Let me know in the comments how you think The Simpsons has handled death in these episodes, as well as your favorite examples. I vote for the Willy hat trick. Have a happy Halloween, everyone! Try to stay away from Tom Turkey.